That'll be $75 for the bag, sir. Policy is policy. The voice was clipped, the smile perfunctory. At gate C-17, a glossy terminal bathed in halogen light and hurry, Agent Mallory barely looked up from her monitor. Before her stood Raymond Leclerc, a man of 89 with a slight stoop and a soft, courtly way of speaking that belonged to another era. His hands, calloused but careful, gripped a leather valise, scuffed, compact, and meticulously packed. To her, he was an old man with an oversized bag. To himself, he was a guardian of memory, standing in a space that saw neither him nor his burden. Raymond had once moved like a man whose decisions shaped the fate of others. As a young combat medic in Korea, he'd survived snowstorms, landmines, and the long silence of triage tents. After the war, he became a pediatrician, tending to life instead of loss. His voice remained gentle, his temper tempered by years of endurance. This trip was to return to a mountain village in Vermont, site of a long-promised memorial, long delayed, where a bronze plaque would finally bear the names of the 36 medics who didn't return. In his valise were mementos, a diary, a pair of dog tags that weren't his, a blood-stained field manual. He needed to keep them close. Mallory, her nails clicking over the keyboard, did not soften when he explained. Everyone thinks their bag is special, sir. Her co-worker, a young man with a Bluetooth headset and energy drink in hand, chuckled softly. The line behind Raymond sighed and shifted. It wasn't the fee, it was the dismissal. The public shaming. He was a man who had carried wounded boys across frozen valleys, now being told he was holding things up. He reached for his wallet, the act trembling with quiet defeat. A woman, mid-40s, composed, and alert, watched from nearby. She'd been reading something on her phone but had looked up at the moment Raymond had said, "I served with the 121st Medical Company." She rose and approached without ceremony. There was no flourish to her movements, only a quiet gravity. "Excuse me," she said to Mallory. "Could you hold off a moment? That man's name is Raymond Leclerc." She turned to him, "From Imjin River, right?" He nodded, puzzled. "My uncle died there," she said. He always spoke of the medic who wouldn't leave him behind. Mallory blinked, uncomprehending. The woman reached into her satchel and produced a federal ID card. She was Lieutenant Colonel Anna Rodriguez, Army Reserves, Medical Corps. Her voice, even and low, cut through the terminal's drone. "Dr. Leclerc is a decorated field medic. Silver Star. He has saved more lives than you or I can count." Her voice sharpened. "If this airline chooses to charge him for a bag holding the last testimony of men who never came home, you're not just enforcing policy, you're betraying memory." Mallory's mouth opened, but before she could speak, a quiet murmur rolled through the terminal. People had stopped moving. Phones lowered. Nearby passengers now listened, heads turning. A supervisor appeared, summoned by that strange electricity that gathers when conscience surfaces in public. He asked what the issue was, his voice overly warm, trying to cool a fire he didn't understand. Rodriguez didn't turn toward him. "Sir," she said, "the issue is whether this airline respects sacrifice." The supervisor looked from Rodriguez to Raymond, to the small valise on the ground. His voice faltered. We can waive the fee." "No," Rodriguez said, "you will honor the contents." A pause. Then the supervisor nodded, the kind of nod that surrenders quietly, without needing an audience. "He'll be upgraded," he said softly. Rodriguez nodded once. It wasn't about the upgrade. It was about not allowing a man like Raymond Leclerc to be diminished, here, of all places. She picked up the valise, her movements precise, reverent. When she boarded the plane beside him 10 minutes later, she placed it gently in the overhead bin above his seat. The aisle around them was hushed. "You didn't have to do that," Raymond said once they were seated. "I did," Rodriguez answered. "You saved my uncle." Raymond's eyes blinked slowly. His name? Eduardo Torres. Corporal. 121st. Raymond's lips parted. The name meant something. He looked toward the window. In 1952, he said slowly, your uncle had shrapnel in his abdomen. It was snowing. The evacuation route had collapsed. He paused. He said he wasn't afraid to die, but he was afraid to die alone. Rodriguez didn't reply immediately. Her gaze was forward, her hands still. You carried him? She asked. For 2 miles. On a stretcher made of a door and 2 rifles. He exhaled. He held my hand the entire way. I thought I was keeping him alive. But the truth is, he kept me alive. Silence stretched. The plane taxied. Dr. Leclerc, she said, he told that story every Christmas. My grandmother would light a candle. Then he'd go quiet, and say the war didn't make him believe in death, it made him believe in mercy. Raymond's mouth curled slightly. It wasn't a smile. More like a memory surfacing beneath frost. The flight took off. Outside, the late March sky dulled into gray overcast. Inside, stillness settled. Raymond leaned back, his hands folded over his lap. Rodriguez sat beside him in uniform. No words were exchanged for a long time. Halfway through the flight, the pilot made an unusual announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I've just been informed we have a very special passenger on board. Dr. Raymond Leclerc, Korean War medic, Silver Star recipient. On behalf of this flight crew and our airline, thank you for your service. You remind us what courage looks like when no one is watching. Applause didn't erupt. But something better happened. A quiet reverence settled over the cabin. A few passengers looked over and gave Raymond small nods. One man across the aisle reached across and shook his hand. An elderly woman placed her hand over her heart. A flight attendant gently touched his shoulder as she passed. Raymond closed his eyes. He didn't need noise. He didn't need words. What he needed was this, a moment where memory wasn't an afterthought. Where what had been endured wasn't buried beneath policy or time or bureaucracy. Rodriguez leaned toward him. Your flight ends in Montpellier? Bar, actually. The memorial's there. Quiet town. I'll accompany you, she said. You don't need to. I want to. When they landed, a small honor guard waited near the jet bridge. Rodriguez had made calls. A local VFW post commander stood in dress blues, flanked by 2 younger veterans. They saluted as Raymond exited. No fanfare. Just presence. At the curb, a car waited. The valise rode on Rodriguez's lap. Bar was quiet in late afternoon. The town sat beneath low cloud and the kind of stillness that only old New England towns possess, where memory doesn't leave, it lingers. The monument stood at the edge of a wooded cemetery. New granite, simple. 36 names. Beneath them, the words, for those who ran into fire, not for glory, but for each other. Rodriguez stood with him. A small crowd had gathered, locals, a few aging veterans, some children brought by teachers who understood what gratitude looks like when taught young. Raymond opened the valise. He removed the diary, the dog tags, the blood-stained field manual. He placed them into a glass case embedded in the monument's base. I promised I'd bring them back, he said, not to the crowd, but to the wind. I didn't forget you. Rodriguez stepped back. No speeches. No anthem. Just the sound of trees in wind, and the names being read aloud by a local chaplain with a trembling voice. The ceremony ended without applause. People lingered, but only for a while. A few offered quiet handshakes, subdued thanks, soft touches on the shoulder. Then they drifted back to their cars, the way people do when they know something sacred has happened but don't have the words to name it. Rodriguez remained beside Raymond. The sky was starting to dim, the sun behind the hills bleeding amber through the leafless trees. Snow still dotted the ground in hard patches where the light hadn't touched. Raymond sat on the bench near the memorial. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Rodriguez stood a few feet away, her hands in her coat pockets, watching the wind move through the birch trees. She had learned in the army when to talk, and more importantly, when not to. It was Raymond who finally broke the silence. "I thought they'd all be forgotten," he said quietly. "I thought maybe I was the last one who remembered their names without needing to read them." Rodriguez didn't answer. Instead, she sat down beside him. "The silence," he said. "That's the part no one prepares you for. The war ends, but the silence starts. Every time someone doesn't ask, or doesn't look. Every year that passes without a letter or a phone call." He paused. "Every time you go to a place like that airport, and someone talks to you like you're nobody." Rodriguez nodded. "They trained us to save lives," he continued. "They didn't train us how to carry the ones we couldn't." A long moment passed. "My uncle," she said finally, "used to go very still on winter nights. He'd sit by the window for hours. Wouldn't say anything. My grandmother told us to let him be." Raymond turned slightly. "I think he was waiting," Rodriguez continued. "Not for someone. Just waiting for something inside him to quiet down." Raymond looked toward the monument. "That quiet never came," he murmured. "It just got familiar." The wind moved again, sharper now. A crow called from the far trees. Snow crunched as someone approached. A young man, early 20s, stood respectfully by the stone path. "Dr. Leclerc?" Raymond looked up. "I'm Jonah," the young man said. "My grandfather served with the 121st, Harold Bingham." Raymond blinked. "Harold," he repeated, voice trailing off. "Big man. Laughed too loud. Carried a photo of his kids in his helmet." Jonah smiled faintly. "That's him. He had 3 ribs broken by shrapnel. Refused morphine so he could stay awake during evac." Jonah nodded. "He always said the medic who carried him was part mule, part angel." Raymond chuckled. "He said that? Every Thanksgiving. Right before the pie." Raymond's smile faded slowly. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said. "A brave one." Jonah hesitated, then extended something forward. "A folded photograph. He wanted you to have this. Said he owed you more than words." Raymond unfolded it carefully. A black and white picture, Harold, grinning crookedly, his arm around 2 others in a trench somewhere snow-covered. One of them was Raymond, impossibly young. "I didn't know this still existed," Raymond said softly. "He kept it in his desk. Said if he ever had a chance, he'd thank you in person." Raymond looked down at the photo. "Sometimes," he said, "the ones who don't come back aren't just the dead. Sometimes we come back, but we don't return." "Not really." He handed the photo back. "No," Jonah said, refusing. "It's yours." Raymond held it for a moment longer, then slid it into his coat pocket, near his heart. "Thank you," he said. "You don't know what this means." "I think I do," Jonah replied. Then he turned and walked back toward the road. As the light thinned, Rodriguez checked her watch. "I have to head back tonight," she said. "Flight at 7. Drill weekend." Raymond nodded. "Of course. But I'll be back," she added. "Next month. There's something I need to show you. A record we found in a declassified archive. It mentions you." Raymond raised an eyebrow. I thought those files were gone. Most were. But not all. And I think you deserve to know what was written down. She stood, buttoned her coat. I'll be in touch, Dr. Leclerc. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. For everything. Rodriguez nodded once. Then she turned and walked slowly down the snowy path, her boots leaving clean, precise tracks. Raymond remained on the bench until dusk bled into dark. The wind had softened. The trees stood watch. He looked at the monument one last time, then rose. The plaque glimmered faintly in the last light. They saved lives in silence. May their silence never be mistaken for absence. He touched the glass case where the dog tags and manual now rested. The weight of years didn't vanish. But tonight, it shifted. The long-held burden no longer belonged to him alone. The next morning, frost laced the windows of the small inn where Raymond had spent the night. A single-story building tucked between a church and a shuttered general store, it hadn't changed much since the 1970s. The front desk had no computer, only a ledger. His room smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. He rose early, as he always had, and sat for a long time at the edge of the bed, the morning stillness wrapping itself around him like the medic's tense silence he remembered so well. By 8, he was dressed, wool trousers, cardigan, a scarf knit by his late wife. The valise, now empty, remained on the nightstand. He wouldn't carry it home. It had served its purpose. Downstairs, in the inn's small dining room, a woman in her 60s poured him a cup of coffee before he asked. Her name tag read Jean. She didn't speak much, but she gave him a soft smile and a plate of eggs and toast without question. Halfway through breakfast, the bell above the inn's front door chimed. A man entered, tall and narrow-shouldered, with a state police windbreaker and hesitant steps. His hair was gray, his eyes unreadable. Dr. Leclerc, he asked, stepping into the dining room. Raymond looked up. Yes. I'm Lieutenant Calhoun. Bar State Police. May I sit? Raymond gestured to the empty seat across from him. Calhoun took it. A pause, then, you were at the ceremony yesterday. I was. Calhoun nodded. There was an incident this morning. Vandals. The memorial was defaced. Spray paint. Broken case. Raymond didn't react. Just placed his coffee cup down slowly. Dog tags, he asked. Gone. So was the field manual. We're treating it as a targeted act. Raymond said nothing. Calhoun continued. We have footage. 2 teenagers. Locals. One of them posted a video online. Called it just an old man's war museum. Thought it was funny. Raymond leaned back. I've seen worse, he said quietly. But that's not the point, is it? No, sir, Calhoun said. It's not. Raymond looked at the officer, something in his gaze sharpening. Do you have children, Lieutenant? Calhoun nodded. A son. In the army. Second tour in Poland. Then you know, Raymond said. What it means when someone spits on memory. It's not about the stone. It's about the silence that follows. Calhoun cleared his throat. We've retrieved the items. Nothing destroyed, just thrown in a ditch nearby. They didn't know what they were holding. They never do, Raymond murmured. I wanted to bring them to you personally. Before returning them to the site. Bring them, Raymond said. Calhoun left the room, returned moments later with a sealed evidence bag. Inside, the dog tags, tarnished but intact. The manual, pages stained but legible. Raymond reached out and placed a hand on the bag gently, reverently. They'll go back, he said. But not yet. Calhoun nodded. We'll keep a patrol on the memorial now. You have my word. Raymond looked down at the items, then at the officer. Tell them, he said. Tell your son. This country isn't made up of monuments. It's made of memory. What we choose to carry forward. Calhoun stood. Understood, sir. After the officer left, Raymond finished his coffee. He ate the rest of his toast without tasting it. Outside, the town moved slowly. The wind had changed. That afternoon, Rodriguez called. They arrested the boys, she said. Community service, counseling. Raymond said nothing. They're young, she added. 17. Maybe this can become a lesson. All things should, he said. She paused. You still have the manual? Yes. I found something in the archives. Raymond waited. In 1952, there was a radio transmission intercepted during an evacuation. A soldier described watching a medic cross open ground for the third time under fire. The transmission ends with, he moved like memory itself. Slow, careful. Refused to leave the last man. Raymond exhaled softly. I never heard that. No one ever told you? No, he said. That's how it is. You save someone, and they never find the words. Or you don't save them, and the silence is louder. Rodriguez's voice changed, quieter. You want me to return? You don't need to, Raymond replied. But I'd like it. Then I'll come. That night, he placed the dog tags on the table beside the bed. They faced upward, like they had waited years for someone to look again. The manual remained wrapped in cloth, folded like a burial flag. The next morning, he walked alone to the memorial. It had been cleaned, the glass repaired. A small flag fluttered beside it. He placed the tags and the manual back inside. And then, without ceremony, he turned and walked away. He didn't need witnesses. Memory, if carried properly, doesn't need applause. Rodriguez returned 3 weeks later, this time in civilian clothes, though the way she walked hadn't changed. She still scanned doorways when she entered a room, still kept her back to the wall in diners. The habits of war fade slowly, if they fade at all. Raymond met her outside the Bar Public Library. A bronze statue of a Civil War bugler stood nearby, half lost in weather and pigeons. You found it? He asked. Rodriguez nodded. Not a file. A letter. From one of the men you pulled out. Harold Weston. Sent to Army Intelligence in 1954. He described a medic, no name, who refused extraction until every man was accounted for. He called him the one who walked backward, always looking for the missing. Raymond looked toward the statue. I remember Weston, he said. He was half blind after a mortar burst. I led him by hand through a trench full of ice water. Rodriguez pulled a folded paper from her bag. You were cited indirectly in 5 separate letters. Each described a different incident. But the common detail was always the same. She handed the letter to him. Raymond read in silence. His hand trembled slightly. You didn't think this would matter, she asked gently. I didn't think it would be found, he said. What I did, what we did, wasn't for record. It was because we were the only ones left. He folded the letter carefully and handed it back. I'm not keeping it, he said. I'd just lose it eventually. Rodriguez returned it to her satchel. We've begun compiling oral histories, she said. First-hand accounts from surviving medics. Some will be preserved at the Library of Congress. Raymond shook his head. I wouldn't know where to start. Start with one name, she said. He didn't answer. Later that afternoon, they drove together to the old VA clinic on the edge of town. The parking lot was mostly empty. Inside, the building smelled of paper and disinfectant and things slowly aging. Rodriguez had arranged an interview with the archive team. A woman named Leah, in her 30s with a quiet voice and a handheld recorder, waited in a side room beside a desk with a single folder marked, LeClaire, Raymond J. She greeted him like someone greeting a priest. "I just want to hear the things no one else wrote down," she said. "The human parts." Raymond sat slowly. "It's not a story," he said. "It's a chain of moments. Things you carry. Faces. Sounds. Smells. The first time you saw a man die without making a sound." Leah didn't interrupt. She just hit record and waited. Raymond's voice, soft at first, found its shape as he spoke. He described the sound of wet boots on snow in January. The moment when someone handed him a photo of a wife and said, "Don't let me die before I see her again." The time he sat with a young corporal dying of shock, telling him made-up stories until his breathing stopped. "Most of us never held a weapon," he said. "We held wrists. We held eyes. We held the last word someone would ever speak." He paused. "And we held silence. Carried it. All the way home." Leah's eyes brimmed, but she didn't speak. Rodriguez stood behind her, hands folded. Watching. An hour passed. Then another. Raymond's voice never rose. He told things plainly. Without trying to teach. Without trying to make anyone feel anything except what was true. When he finished, Leah clicked the recorder off. "I'd like to come back," she said. Raymond nodded. "If you want. But some things don't get clearer. They just get quieter." That evening, back at the inn, he found a letter under his door. It was from the boy who'd vandalized the memorial. Handwritten, full of spelling errors and crossed-out lines. It read, "I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know who you were. My dad served in Iraq. I guess I forgot what that means. It ended, I'm sorry. If I could help clean the glass or fix the stone, I will." Raymond sat with the letter on his lap for a long time. He didn't reply. But 2 mornings later, a new name was etched at the bottom of the plaque. Not among the 36, but beside them. For the ones who forgot, and the ones who remembered for them. Rodriguez stood with him as he looked at it. "That was your doing?" he asked. "No," she said. "It was the boys." He asked permission to add it. The town council agreed. Raymond nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "remorse is the first step toward remembrance." Rodriguez touched his arm gently. "We're starting a new initiative," she said. "Stories like yours. Quiet acts. Not just medals. Not just war stories. The things that happened after." Raymond looked at her. "You mean the part no one asks about?" "Yes," she said. "That part." He turned to the monument one last time that day. "I don't have much time left." "You have enough," she said. They stood there, not speaking again, for a long while. The snow returned that night, light, quiet, deliberate. Spring crept in slowly, the way it does in Vermont, gravel shoulders thawing before sidewalks, birds returning in pairs to bare trees. The days lengthened, but the light still had that early season coolness, like it hadn't quite decided to stay. Raymond remained in bar. He had been planning to leave after the memorial, after the items were returned and silence resumed its usual shape. But something had shifted. Not just in the town, but in him. People began to nod when they saw him. Not out of recognition, but out of something more human, acknowledgement. He had lived so long unnoticed that the smallest gestures now felt sacred. One afternoon, he received a letter from the Vermont State Historical Society. Inside was a formal request: would he consider allowing his field manual, diary, and dog tags to become part of a permanent exhibit titled Unseen Service, The Quiet Valor of Combat Medics, 1917 to 1975. He stared at the letter for a long time. Not because he doubted the honor, but because he hadn't realized that what he'd carried for so long had become worthy of preservation. Rodriguez visited again, this time without uniform or pretense. She helped him draft a reply. "Make it plain," he told her. "No grand language." So he wrote, "You may display the items. But please understand, they belonged more to the men who didn't return than to me. If you include anything, make it their names. Not mine." The exhibit was approved 2 weeks later. In a sunlit room inside the Montpellier Veterans Annex, a new glass case was mounted. Inside, his manual rested open to a stained page titled Field Hemorrhage Control. The margins bore penciled notes in shaky cursive. A small plaque read, "Belonged to Raymond Leclerc, 121st Medical Company, Korean War. Used during winter campaigns, 1952. Credited with preserving 36 lives. Contents marked in real time, mid-evacuation." Next to it sat the dog tags and the diary. But it was the adjacent wall that carried the weight. There, carved into bronze, were the names of those Raymond had spoken aloud one misty morning at the monument. Rodriguez had made sure of that. The day the exhibit opened, a bus arrived from a nearby high school. Teenagers wandered through the room, restless, curious. But by the time they reached the case with the blood-stained manual, their voices grew quiet. A teacher read aloud a single passage from Raymond's diary, chosen by Leah, the archivist. "We treat them because they're there. Because they need us. Because that is the whole reason for being here, not to win anything. Just to not let them die alone." Afterward, one of the boys stood in front of the names, his lips moving silently. Maybe he was sounding them out. Maybe he was saying thank you. Or maybe he just understood something, for the first time, that couldn't be put into words. Back in Bar, Raymond's days found rhythm again. Mornings at the cafe. Afternoons in the library. Evenings watching the light fade across the old stone church where the bell no longer rang but still stood. One morning, Rodriguez sat across from him at the cafe. Her coffee untouched. "You've been asked to speak," she said. "Where?" "The Academy in Montpellier. Senior cadets. Medical track. They want to hear what field medicine used to mean." Raymond exhaled. "What it still means." "Yes," she said. "That's why they need to hear it from you." He looked out the window. "I'm not a speaker." "You're a witness," she replied. "That's rarer." A week later, he stood at the front of a plain classroom. No podium. No projector. Just 20 young faces in uniform. Some eager, some distracted, some with that certain weight in their eyes, the kind that knows service won't be clean. He didn't tell stories of medals or missions. He told them how hands shake under pressure. How wounds don't always look like they do in training films. How sometimes you carry someone through mud and blood and cold, only for them to die in the helicopter 10 minutes later. "Your job," he said, "isn't glory. It's bearing witness. If they go, you remember their name. If they live, you remember the sound of their breath coming back." At the end, no one clapped. That silence, again. But this time, it held reverence. Rodriguez drove him home. "You did more than speak," she said. He nodded. Then, after a pause, "I want to go back." "To the mountain?" "To the place where the names are." The next morning, they returned to the monument. The glass had not been touched since the restoration. Fresh flowers had been left. A small flag, folded and placed beside the stone, had a note tucked beneath. "I brought my grandfather today. He said he owes his life to you." Raymond read the note, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat. "This," he said, "is enough." Rodriguez watched him. He reached out, his hand resting lightly on the plaque. His voice came soft, like a memory passing through fog. "I remember them all. Every face. Every wound. Every last word." And then, after a pause, "And now, they remember me too." She said nothing. Some things are too sacred for commentary. That night, Raymond wrote a letter. Not for publication. Not for archives. Just a single page, folded once, addressed to no one. It read, "If you find this, know that I did not forget. I walked backward so they would not disappear. And I did not disappear either. You found me. Thank you." He tucked it inside the diary, then closed the cover. Still remembered.